I am inspired by the wonderful challenge of getting to be the agenda position right after lunch, when your bodies and minds would likely much rather be in siesta mode. And I want to thank you for coming to talk about the quest for ideal brand health and ad tracking. One of the big spoilers I should probably do is this unfortunately is not a destination story. This is a travelogue from the journey of my personal vetting of 20 suppliers in the brand health tracking space and my snapshots and observations as I've taken in the category at large. I will say El Dorado remains elusive, but it's so important for us as an industry to think about where we are in our own corporate and personal journeys towards the insights that will be more forward-looking and potentially liberate the funds that we're spending right now for purposes of awesomeness. So with that, I forgot my clicker. In order to help us keep this adventure inspired, what we're going to do is choose your own adventure version of my talk, where I will tee up a series of images and you will pick the content I speak to. It's really amazingly dark in here, so I thought it would be easier to take an audience poll, but I think I'll have you shout it out and we can do it that way. Essentially, we'll have 5 parts. I'll walk you through your choices. So these are your 2 choices for the quest. The finding our religion, getting it all put together, the greater picture, and the what it all means. All right, so your first choice is here. Just like in reality, this deck's a little bit stacked. What do you choose, the dragon or whale? All right, whale it is. All right, essentially, we are in a situation right now in our industry where we spend, many of us, not all of us, money trying to think about the observable world, the world where we're asking consumers, and really thinking about what brands mean and how we value them. There's so much, I think, that we potentially stand to gain as an industry and for the companies we work for and with, that if we could essentially free up the funds and the energy to be forward-looking, we should absolutely do it. So going backwards, just to make sure you get to the full quest. This is me, and apparently Greg Archibald, he's probably not psyched about the likeness, but essentially what I did was partner with Gen 2 to help me comb through the landscape of all the potential brand and ad health tracking partners that we could think of. If you're not on this list, please see me afterwards, and I've added a few since my initial version. Essentially at Keurig, we were trying to rethink all of the pieces of what we were doing. We were thinking about long-term brand equity. We were trying to think about those shorter-term moments where you're trying to understand how a campaign is working in the market. We were also trying to think about our real consumers' experience of our brands, though, and that real-time reaction. We'd had a few episodes of some pop culture in our brands interacting in a kind of significant way. Some of you may be aware of the Hannity moment. And I think we essentially wanted to, as a company, make sure we were thinking about how we could tie all the pieces together better. So we looked at this group. There were some who responded right away. There are a few on this list that I did not hear back from. Probably a good lesson learned is if you get the quest, if you ever are thinking about why is this person reaching out to me, it's probably good to reach back and ask the questions. So this was the list. All right, our next section, you have the choice of the Cola Man or the Windows. All right. So that is George Homans, and I always favor a good relationship metaphor when it comes to thinking about our brands. It's always better for storytelling when you sort of tell the tale of you going dark as a brand and not being on air to just be, we didn't return consumers' calls for 3 years, and other people did. But essentially this idea of brand as the really worthy riddle of why people pay more for a product that's absolutely functionally similar. And thinking about it as a relationship to me is one of those really helpful things. Certainly, we all would like to be more predictive of relationships as well. But ultimately, that's the value we're trying to move and measure. Ultimately, when you think about our challenge, though, as well, marketing in our industry, which is generally the function we're supporting in this quest, is really having a challenging moment in the sense that if you're a CMO in a big corporation right now, you likely have enough experience to be senior enough to be CMO, but you've been out of the trenches for a while too in the world of programmatic digital, and things are changing so much that traditional pillar of companies and that sort of right-hand person of a CEO is in a spot that's more wobbly than it used to be. And whether you're, as a company, coming from sort of a Byron Sharp voice of thinking about availability and thinking big, or if you're thinking about how to be an influencer company and brand, or if you're really thinking about your deeper relationships with a target group of deep users, these are all really important things to think about. And I would posit that there's no right answer to these questions, but probably a bit of truth in all of it. So in these moments where you get to pull the lens back and sort of think about it all, I feel like it's really important to take in all the ways and perspectives and really the challenges of marketing as a whole. All right. Our next section, the horses or orchestra. All right, horses. I'll just do a time check here. I don't think we started our timer. So this slide, there's actually quite a bit to it. One of the first things we needed to do was think about all of the things we were doing at Keurig Green Mountain to track our brands. And we had a lot of different silos of activity. This is essentially the way I've broken it out here is the dark green was if it was something that we had that was built in, something we could do with the tool and were doing. Maybe the light green was like we maybe weren't fully optimizing what it could do or had not put enough full weight on it. Yellow was like sort of not ultimately something that it was particularly good at one way or the other, but maybe it gave you a glimpse. And red was just like, this is something that the tool cannot do. And as we looked at what we had in place as far as tools, we had our current ask-based tracker. We had all of the media measurements that were happening through our media buying agency, which, had both of those columns had moments when the organization had demanded, let's cut costs. Both of those columns had been sort of cost saved so that in the end, when we had to answer questions about what was happening, it was sort of that moment where like, wow, I hope they have more left over in column 2 than we have in column 1, and a little bit of both. There was without that bigger orchestrated vision, there was a little bit of a couple studies that were sub-optimized to save costs, and ultimately, when the moment came together, we were like, ooh, we should be thinking more holistically. And then in the third and fourth column, we have a couple of the things we were doing to think about emotion more deeply, but that maybe weren't as closely integrated with our brand tracking efforts. So we have sort of a deep listening impact analysis type of work where we pull all of our unstructured data together to think about sort of where we can best drive our business. We do that with our CRM data, all the available reviews from the internet, all of our unstructured survey data, and really think about that for level of emotion and also sort of with that, the amount of business driving impact we can get. But it needed to be orchestrated in more closely. And then we also have a tool where we're doing real-time brand tracking. And this is a tool I really like because it essentially gives us, it's the most real-time aggregator of everything that's happening online. And it uses a brand equity lens to do that. So essentially the people who developed it went and interviewed CMOs across America to think about what it was they needed more of and how they could essentially sort the unstructured data into something closer to a brand equity tracking world. So we had these pieces. They maybe weren't perfectly well orchestrated, but they were present. And one of the biggest things, one of the earliest ahas we found was just from taking that view of the bigger picture, we had really low-hanging fruit in some areas of just thinking about what how our pieces came together to better drive business. So I won't spend a lot of time on exactly what solution we ended up with, but there was one aha moment where, frankly, we could do a better job of looking at our brand relative to competition in sort of a more deep dive type of way that supported the annual planning and was a modest incremental cost. And we essentially were able to see those opportunities and pull those things together in a way that really helped us drive the business better. All right, your next choice, map or the horses? All right, map. So one of the things, though, that becomes a real challenge when you're in the world of thinking about orchestration in these different pieces, well, one of the challenges for us was we actually did have some proposals that offered to do this for us, that essentially pulled everything together. But it's sort of a Cadillac level of cost commitment at that point. And we had a lot of things that were working all right, but potentially needed to be better optimized. And as we think and continue to sort of orchestrate and pull measures together, thinking about how we really reflect on relevance and availability, on differentiation and distinctive assets is something we're going to continue to invest in and think about and build our knowledge base out. I think we've got some good foundational work, but I think we're working to kind of take that up to the next level. Ultimately, though, the real question I have is how can we get to a more forward-looking system? I'm not using this as an example of necessarily who we chose, but I think out of the proposals, it was a particular example of a really elegant way of thinking about both emotional and rational measures, and also sort of the drivers of your business in terms of your equity assessment and what you need to sort of communicate and market. I do think that as whatever we're doing, we need to think about bringing those emotional pieces in. Obviously, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but sometimes in a world where you have a lot of brand equity junkies, as I call them, who have been sort of trained to get their annual fix of their brand equity score and how we're doing, it's a hard game to change, and I think we all need to commit to trying harder to get it to change faster. And then the reality of really working to pull the ask versus the observe together better, more. But this idea of better measures, measured better, I think is a really important takeaway for where we need to be thinking and driving for the future. All right, last set. The Viewmaster or the money? All right. So essentially, the question we're coming back to is can we enable more awesomeness for our money? Can we get more future-focused and less rear-view mirror? And can we drive meaningful action in market and really get to those correlations with our brand value? That's the challenge, and I think the challenge is using the clicker sometimes. Ultimately, thinking about how we do that while maintaining the fullest possible view, and really thinking about the reality of always on and consistently executed was honestly one of those pieces where it shouldn't be an aha moment, but I think there's those moments when you look at all the pieces together when they're suddenly on the table and you realize we could be doing better. And one of the pieces that was really important that's easy to overlook is that excellence of experience and how we boil it down. And I'm not saying we have it perfectly baked. I think we're still on the journey. But this idea of really how you get this seated in your organization and be the change that you want to see is really where we're focused next. So with that, I can take some questions. Possibly, if I can see you. All right, I think we're good.